Hello and welcome into the Hytro Human Performance Podcast. My name is Chase Latimer. I'm your host today, joined by Tom Brownlee and the guest of honor, Kelly Borges. Kelly, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Awesome to have you on. Probably a long time coming here, but really excited to dive in a bit. For anybody who doesn't know you, if you don't mind kind of giving a little bit of a background, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me. As Chase said, my name's Kelly Borges. I'm the Associate Director of Strength and Conditioning at Purdue University. I do also work with USA Softball as their strength and conditioning coach. But as Chase and I have talked about previously, that's the side gig, side hustle. My primary responsibilities are with Purdue University, specifically working with their volleyball program. I essentially got here from bouncing all around across the country, born and raised in California, spent time in Texas at Baylor University, Florida State, Ohio State, Maryland, and now I'm at Purdue. So I've spent a little bit of time in the Midwest, quite a bit of time in the Big Ten. It reminds me a little bit of home, which some people could probably be confused on, considering I said California. But Chase, as you know, California is a little diverse, and my part of California is a lot more like the Midwest. But just professionally, have really enjoyed working at a high level in those Power Four conferences and finding ways to find that 1% to help make student athletes better.
Awesome, Kelly. And I'm always really curious to hear just how you got into the field in general. What was kind of the motivation or the kind of spark that led to where you diving into this field?
Yeah, I grew up playing sports, played in college, nothing too significant, just Division II, but played softball in college. Really enjoyed that, but also I was Division II. Resources, however many years ago that was, were even less at the Division II level, and always felt like there was, some resources and whatnot that missed in my experience. And going into undergrad and being a part of a generation where everybody goes to college, and it was a big important thing. I went to college and I changed my degree about 5 times. So I can't even sit there and say this is what I always wanted to do. And as soon as I knew about it, that was it. I bounced around, thought I wanted to do nutrition, thought I wanted to do business, thought I wanted to do athletic training. And then it was, a formative mentor in my life said, I think you need to try this out. Cause that was when I was coaching, being a sport coach within softball, and I enjoyed that. But again, something was still kind of missing. So she threw that idea at me, and I went and did one little shadowing observation, and that was kind of where I was like, I think I could not be bored if I did this for life. And so got into strength and conditioning, started at Baylor University, as what Baylor calls a black shirt. And just kind of worked my way through there, and yeah, that's how I am where I am now.
Not always a just straight linear line, right?
No, not at all.
Seldom. Kelly, we've never had the pleasure of meeting before, but it's really nice to hear that sort of introduction to the story. And similar story to mine, to be honest, but ended up in soccer, where there's lots of jobs in the UK as an S&C coach. And I don't know loads about
Yeah.
volleyball, so pander to my ignorance. What does sort of high performance volleyball look like? What does it look like for your athletes? Sounds like I love peeking behind the curtain at different sports.
Yeah. So funny you mentioned soccer, football. I know we got some UK representation, so it's not always called soccer. But I actually, when I first got into strength and conditioning, I was heavily exposed to soccer and softball. And I think as I continued on in my career, and one, had a lot of mentors that were pouring into me, and knowing that that's eventually what I want to do, had the recognition and had some people that shared with me that, like, your team assignment always isn't going to matter. And they were right. And some of them will probably chuckle hearing me say that. But I think that's what made it really exciting to come and work with volleyball in a top 15, top 10 program year in and year out, is because I did have that large foundation in soccer and softball, and you get a little bit of similar energy systems within softball as volleyball, but there's that component of jumping. So I think the big thing that sticks out with volleyball is that anaerobic capacity, that anaerobic power, the jump height, And you'll sit there, and even with your DSs, your liberos, people will sit there and still care about that jump height, still care about that approach. But the longer and more I've spent time around volleyball, like, yes, jump height is king. But what's our repeatability on that? Because I've had great conversations with the coaching staff here, and it's not always the best team that wins. It's the healthiest team at the end of the season. And I think that comes with that repeatability of, we've maximized our strength, but can we now do that through the grueling schedule of the Big Ten with travel? The Big Ten's now expanded. We got to go coast to coast. We got to find ways to get creative and recover, because we're going to go 5 sets for 5 matches in a row. And then how do we come back the next match still to play at our best?
Yeah, it's not always that sexy, but it's the old the best ability is availability. Hey, it doesn't really matter how good you are
Yeah.
otherwise. But it's and you talk about top 15 and stuff. That must be really exciting to be in and around that. And from your experience with volleyball specifically, I imagine it probably is way beyond just energy systems. When you're looking at those who are able to sort of outperform those who are head and shoulders above the rest, what sort of sets them apart for you?
Well, that's part of what you said, is the head and shoulders above the rest. They are all drastically taller than me. Even our shorter DSs, liberos, they still got a couple inches on me. So, like, right, you can sit there and talk about what's going to set a volleyball player up for the most success. And yeah, if you have someone that's 6'6", and as soon as they take their arms above their head, they're already, up there around 9 foot over the net, that's going to help them. But then being able to mitigate the wear and tear of jumping repeatedly. Obviously you're going to have those max effort jumps and those peaks. But also you're going to have a lot of low intensity jumps, and that's where a lot of the accumulation is coming from. So being able to make sure that those tendons and ligaments that support that movement, are able to take on the beating throughout the season.
And what about from a non-physical point of view, the sort of mindset approach?
Um, There's definitely that intensity that comes with volleyball. As I mentioned, having a larger background in soccer when I first started, um, I said to numerous people after the first 4 or 5 weeks of my first season here, like, the stress. It was a different type of stress of, okay, you have a soccer game going 0-0 all the way in the 90th minute, and you're probably gonna have to do PKs. But then there's also the point for point back and forth in volleyball, and people running down free balls, and people chasing things out of bounds and jumping up and ripping it to the ground. And, like, just so that intensity, being able to see them bring that energy and kind of that sports psychology piece to it. Not to say that doesn't exist in other sports, but I'd say it's in another dimension within volleyball.
Yeah, that does sound pretty intense.
Kelly, one thing I'm curious about, just considering like the demands, the impact, the surface that, you play on. I think we see a lot of similar, um, like common injuries or issues that athletes deal with similarly to basketball. What are some of the common things that you see kind of poke up, frequently within the sport that you're just
Yeah.
constantly meeting or battling?
For sure, I'd say biggest one is probably knees. Anyone that plays up at the net, they're taking a lot of impacts. Their patellar tendon just kind of hits a point in the season usually where we got to give them a lot of love. Obviously, in the off season, trying to build up all of those tendons, tissues, ligaments to help support it. But then there's a lot of points where it's just, all right, we've got to give you the recovery. We've got to give you extra time in treatment, rehab, prehab, however you want to define it for that athlete. But aside from, just kind of the overuse with patellar knee pain, you're seeing some ankles. They just recently changed some rules in NCAA volleyball, to keep people out from underneath the net a little bit more, and hopefully avoid some of those contact injuries of landing on someone else under the net. And we'll see if that helps, or we'll see if that just slows the game down, because they're blowing the whistle a lot because people are still doing it. Um, but then outside of that, those that are swinging through the ball and blocking on the ball a lot in a match, you'll get a little bit of the shoulder stuff too, which is a little, your comparison to basketball is very accurate. But then you start getting people that are swinging and hitting similar to what you'd see in a baseball or softball athlete. And so now you're not just worried about that lower body component, you're also worried about that shoulder.
Yeah, and I think one thing I always like kind of come back to is obviously there's general qualities that you have to be able to prepare the athlete for the sport to be able to handle those demands. And
Mhm.
then additionally, how do you go about kind of whether it be through data capture or assessment, but kind of picking out some individual qualities that the athletes need, just based on body type, based on, some of the physical qualities they have.
I would say biggest kind of assessment we're doing right now, obviously force plates are really big, and if depending upon what force plates you're utilizing in this space, you can get so many metrics, and you can kind of get lost in it, and oh my goodness, we need to do this, we need to do that. Like, I've seen this, I've been able to participate in a research study across some other institutions in the country to collect normative data to be able to see kind of what things look like from an elite level volleyball player on probably about 10 to 15 metrics. And then even from there, I took it and honed it down to like, we got 3 buckets. What's your reactive strength index? So people can kind of go into the weeds on that. But, have we developed the strength and now can we repeat it explosively? And then also propulsive forces and braking forces. And I've really kind of honed in on breaking it down the entire team into kind of those 3 buckets. And it's so far proven fruitful, because also in conversations with the coaches, one of them might be sitting there and saying, yeah, you really need to work on, once you get that early recognition with the ball coming over that net, like exploding forward. And we're in some of these end of season meetings, and I'm like, well, yeah, she's in the propulsive bucket. Like, we need to work on that. She has the strength, she has the braking forces, but it's that component that's missing. So I would say those are the 3 buckets we're really honing in on now, and we'll see how that plays out this upcoming season.
Do you find it challenging to improve those attributes? Because you mentioned the amount of competition and the travel and the recovery and the need for repeatability. I mean, it can be really difficult, can't it, with congested fixtures trying to get those stimulus. So you mentioned loads of sort of fast twitch dominant attributes. How do you find that balance? How do you go about doing that?
I like to say I do it, just with my eyes closed and it's a piece of cake. But that would be a lie. Where we do a pretty good job, performance staff working with the coaches to periodize load throughout um practices, throughout season, in season, out of season, whatever it is. And I think that really helps, is right, kind of the adage saying, whatever, we're keep the high days the high days. When we have a high day at practice, like, I'm gonna try to get as much as I can out of them, depending upon what phase of season we're in, whether it's off season but we're playing games. I'm gonna try to still be selfish a little bit more in the spring where there are qualities that I want to chase, and we've talked to the coaching staff about it, and they're like, no, I really need this. Like, if that means we've got to rein it back in the gym with reps and practice, we'll do it. But I would say the balancing comes with a lot of communication with the coaching staff. Um, because yeah, once I get to fall, like, I take the back seat, and there's a lot more on the recovery end and making sure that we have that repeatability where, I just spent the last 4 months with them where even if they're a little bit tired, it was buckle up. We've got some things we want to chase, and this is our moment to do so.
And Kelly, I mean, it can always like you explained it very easily, but like it becomes very complex, right?
Mhm.
And so many so many demands. I mean, student athletes, they're playing at such a, as Tom said, high fixtures. How do you take just all this complexity and just kind of simplify?
I think a big part of it is that communication with the sport coaches, making sure that, the goals and attributes we're going after are all in alignment with not just what they need from the physical standpoint, but also to help their game within volleyball. Those skills that they're trying to develop. But then the other piece is the athlete education. When you start to give the student athletes the behind the curtain, as you guys said earlier, and showing them, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing, or hey, remember when you used to struggle with this and this in practice, and look how far you've come here, and look now how easy that is. I'd say that the communication, but also the education, are probably the two bigger pieces that I've seen to be more effective in the last couple of years.
When you talk about just the communication, and obviously there's a level of getting buy-in from athletes. How do you approach that with athletes?
I gotta meet them where they're at first and foremost. There are some athletes that don't care about the or maybe they don't care, but that is how they present, that they don't care about the physiology of exactly what's happening in their bodies. Purdue University is a very prestigious academic university. So I've got a lot more of the kids that, if I sit there and do explain the physiology, they kind of geek out and nerd out and enjoy hearing that. And probably buy in a little bit more because they're like, oh, this makes sense. But then there are other athletes that are like, I just want to be good at volleyball. And it's like, all right, well, if you can jump higher and you can swing faster, you can be better at volleyball. Yeah. All right. Then that's why we're doing this. Um, so it's meeting them a little bit where they're at, but then there are the handful of times where they don't understand what you're saying and you're trying not to speak over their head, but you also don't want to dumb it down so much to where you're kind of insulting their intelligence. So there's a little bit of finding that medium too.
Which ones do you
Yeah.
prefer?
In what way?
Do you prefer the ones who want to know all the details and are maybe like slightly skeptical, or do you prefer the ones that are like, I don't care, I'll do whatever you say?
I mean, right? All of it, both of them. There are definitely I've definitely had the athletes that they want to know the why to everything, and um I'm an aunt and I have a nephew going through his stage of life right now where everything is why? 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 You start asking him and all he says is because. But I get like that's our human nature. We want to know why we're doing something, especially when you're an 18 to 22-year-old female and you're learning how to live on your own and grow on your own and become who you're going to be. And sometimes people just telling you what to do, it's like I don't want to do it because you told me to do it. So when you give them that reason and rationale, it's like, all right, like I'll at least give it a try. And I think that's when you have the ones that are a little bit more resistant to it. It's, hey, if this doesn't work, we can go back to square one. We can go back to the drawing board. I'll sit there and say, you're right, it didn't work. This isn't what's best for you, and we'll try something else. But usually along the way, it works to some extent.
And is that especially the case if you're introducing something new, if it's a new training modality or a new piece of equipment? Are they kind of like, I guess similarly, I guess you get those that are curious and those that would be like, no, I know what I'm doing. And then it's up for you to sort of have those conversations, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say I've brought a couple different new things into Purdue volleyball, and it's always been kind of being careful with who I kind of let lead the way with it. I mean, we're on the Hytro podcast. I'm assuming we can talk about the fact that we've implemented Hytro, and so Chase was kind of there for the beginning of the journey and has been there since. But we hit a wall at one point with an individual on our team, and I was like, I've connected with Mitch, who was formerly at Nebraska, and a couple of people that I crossed paths with at Baylor that are now at the Falcons, and just kind of seeing what Hytro had to offer and all of those things. I was like, I think this would be the tipping point to like break us through the barrier and break us through the plateau that we're at with this student athlete. And she is one of those highly intellectual kids. She does want to know the why. She's an engineering major, but even though she lacks some of the like foundation of physiology, well, she checks that box because her mom's a PT. And so all of a sudden you can like have this conversation. And I remember when I told her, I was like, we're going to try something. And I started it with, hear me out. And so I just kind of word vomited it. And as soon as I was done, she said, cool, sounds good. Like, when do I start? She's like, can I start today? I said, well, it's got to get shipped. Like it'll be there, but like that was all it took with her. Um, but I tell that little bit of the story because then like it was a 10 out of 10 experience for her. It was a 10 out of 10 experience for the coaches because they started even calling it like her magic shirt. And then so the coaches were already sold and it was just one athlete. So then when I turned around, I said, "All right, we're getting this for the team." It was great, sounds good. Now we get a magic shirt and magic shorts. So like selective with the student athlete, but she bought in. It was a great addition to her training, her recovery, all of those things, her warm up. So then being able to layer it to the rest of the team, and they're like, well, if it worked for her on all of these fronts, if it works for me on one, that's a win.
Yeah. Kelly, I think this is one that you and I have gotten to talk about a little bit, and I tend to find, and this is from coming from experience in Major League Baseball and working with a lot of coaches in baseball, is sometimes those opportunities present themselves, whether it be in season or when an athlete is just at a point where they're like, I will try anything, you know.
Hmm.
And so with this particular athlete, where was she at in her kind of journey that made you kind of be like, okay, we need a little extra something to get over that hump. I think this is going to be something that can help elevate from where she is.
Yeah.
Where was she at in that process?
So she had had a shoulder surgery, had to get quite a bit repaired. And going into it, like very athletic kid, was going to be, I say kid, young woman. She was a very athletic student athlete of ours. And um, just knowing, having had her for one season and seeing that potential and seeing how hard she could like rip through the ball when she would attack and seeing how high she could jump, it was like, all right, you're in like the top echelon of who we're going to work with here at Purdue within our student athlete population. But it was, she's also just a naturally lean athlete. And so it was like continuing to put on more muscle mass was a big piece of it. Continuing to strengthen all of the smaller, intricate pieces of the shoulder to where it's like, all right, I'm not just sitting there trying to like develop your lats, develop your delts. Like, we're also talking like ligaments, tendons, increasing blood flow to that area to stimulate the growth and do all of those things. Um, and so it really became where she was in her recovery and also or in her rehab, but also like what all she went through to like get to the point of surgery. Cause it like she was dealing with shoulder pain for quite a while and putting it off and putting it off. And, then you get the imaging and you find out what it is and you kind of go through like the slump of emotions of, all right, now I need to have surgery. And I thought I was going to play next season. And what does that look like? And so there was a little bit of like the lull and like depression of the injury to be able to sit there and say like, hey, I think this is something that brings you back even better than you were before surgery. And that was definitely a big piece of it for her, that it was, I have an opportunity to redshirt next season and increase lean muscle mass and continue chasing a faster arm swing and a higher jump and, quicker change of direction, but also just from an overall standpoint, increasing lean muscle mass, increasing the recruitment of fast twitch muscle fibers. And she saw that opportunity as just holistic development beyond just even as a volleyball player. Like, she wasn't touching a volleyball for a long time, or at least in a full practice sense. Maybe some drills standing on a box, just swinging, but no jump, no 100% swing through the ball. So it was a really good opportunity to dangle a carrot, so to speak, if this is going to be something to help you progress. But honestly, we don't even have to do it at like a higher load. And then I mean, the flip side to it too was it gave us an opportunity to kind of double down on the exposure she was getting with BFR. Because typically, I think, we talk about this quite a bit, Chase, where BFR existed primarily in the rehab setting. And if it was happening in the weight room, it was the athletic trainer coming up with the little like IV looking cart with a whole bunch of tubes connected to the athlete. And it became something where it was like, cool, couple times a week, few times a week. Now we're able to give her that exposure instead of just the, 1 or 2 times every other week or every week down in the training room. Like now we have the entire repertoire that we have in the weight room to be able to take her through and do some more specific things to volleyball, but also just general maintenance too.
So, and I mean, it's really unique because, like you said, BFR, and even for myself as a coach, it lives so much in the athletic training space. I had
Hmm.
never conceptualized how this can translate to healthy athletes, or what, like, how can I leverage this to fill certain gaps that exist? And sometimes we don't even, like unconsciously, we're not aware of the gaps of where this can actually integrate and unlock us from a performance standpoint. And I'm curious on, going through that experience with her, was there a moment where you were like, okay, I see the impact. Like we've gone through all this. Was there a moment where you're like, okay, now we can kind of measure ROI?
Yeah, I 100%. I mean, you and I have talked about this a number of times, but I think it was kinda cool in the couple different dimensions that I've already talked about, where one, she did just start putting on more lean muscle mass than she had ever had. And she noticed that right away. Then, she does get reintroduced into team practices, and she even got to play in a spring match, or several spring matches. And it was like, okay, before practice, when we do the dynamic warm up, before the match, when we do the dynamic warm up, like, let's warm up in the shirt. Like Chase and I've talked about it a couple times. Like it's not super regimented on like this many minutes on, this many minutes off. Like our match warm up is really consolidated. Or our dynamic warm up before a match is really consolidated. We can stay in the shirt the whole time. You'll take it off. Then when we have the opportunity to like change jerseys, you just pull that off, put your jersey on, and we're good to go. And the very first time we did that, she was like, I've never felt more warm. And I was just like, "What?" She said, "The first swing that I took on a ball," she's like, "that was as if I had gone and thrown the ball 50 times and done a whole like, she's like, "The 5 minutes I was in the shirt during dynamic warm up, I've never felt more warm through my shoulder." And so it's like, cool, we were already having the success with the prehab, the maintenance, the stuff that we were doing in the weight room, and then all of a sudden it was like we unleashed and unlocked a whole other realm of, all right, your first swing felt, like you normally do 2 sets in a normal match. So she was super excited about that, so much so to where there were a couple times, throughout the rest of that spring season, like, "Oh, we won't do it today," and it was like, "What? We're we're not putting the shirt." Like, I know film went long, but can we have the shirt? And so I do recognize the, like, psyche to some of that, right? They feel good in something and they don't want it then taken away. But that was another little win, to where, she felt better in it. She was getting performance based on it. You were getting that ROI right front in front of your face, so it was good.
That's what we love to hear, I think. What I'm interested in the timeline of the integration of BFR here. So to that point, is it just the one athlete using it still, and you're kind of thinking, oh, maybe I need a few more of these, or is there do the squad have it at this point?
So it was initially just the one athlete. I think we got it might have been like February of our spring. Started doing the prehab stuff with us. We started playing some matches in March. That was when we started utilizing it from like a practice and match warm up standpoint. And then as soon as I saw the return on investment with it being good beyond just kind of that practitioner setting of in the weight room or in the training room, and now all of a sudden we were using it on the court, and still having not even tapped into the recovery side of it. That was, the coaches were sold, I was sold, and it was like, all right, how much do we have in our budget right now to our end of this fiscal year, outfit the team, knowing we'll plug in some pieces budget wise, because obviously this was me shooting from the hip that, hey, let's get this now, but nobody was anticipating buying this now. Um, so then it was, we got, by the time the team came back, for camp in the summer, end of summer, we got to start a couple weeks early, or about 10 days early. So about August, everybody else had it, started integrating it with several more for warm up. And then it was also outstanding to be able to just do some prehab stuff with a lot of the team throughout camp, because we're doing 2 days and loads are super high. And it's like, no, I'm not going to pull you into the weight room and Yeah, I want to drive intent and I want to chase these qualities, but guess what? I throw BFR on you and we can do it at, reduced load and still get a lot of great stimulus that we need to keep you healthy, to keep you fresh. And so it was rolled it out to about the other half of the team, and Chase will be happy that, we're getting some more moving in this next season. But now we have a shirt and a short for everyone on the team. There's a little sharing that takes place. But the plan is to make sure that everybody's got a shirt and a short moving forward so that we can honestly more so maximize that recovery piece. Because there were a couple times in the fall season where I kind of bottlenecked myself that, all right, we're using it for prehab, and then someone just cold tubbed in the shorts, and I'd look at them and say, they're still kind of damp. Best of luck getting them on, but I believe in you.
Um, so Kelly, kind of going from this, okay, we've seen this work, right?
Hmm.
The feedback from the athlete, the impact was pretty clear, and now going into, okay, we've just gotten enough for just about most of the athletes on the squad. How do you go about, this kind of goes back to integrating something new. And I imagine the education piece was very important. And, there's a lot of things that you can do with BFR.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can feel relatively complex, right? So like initial steps of integrating something like this. And again, integrating BFR into the day to day has not been very common. So
Hmm.
one of the things that you and I have talked quite a bit about is just identifying those moments that it integrates very seamlessly with what you're already doing. So
Yeah.
we're not changing the structure of the programming, but still being able to capture those wins that tend to get left on the table. So how did you initially go about identifying, okay, here's where it's going to best slot for the team, and this is how I'm going to educate them to get the buy-in?
I'd say the biggest thing was essentially what you're saying is, right, the sustainability of it. Of if these student athletes are already balancing classes and friendships and family and volleyball and all of those things, to where if it's like, I go and add one more thing on their plate, like, I'm probably gonna be pulling teeth to get that buy-in. But the little moments where, okay, there are a couple that are returning from injury or surgery, and like, all right, you've already got that rehab slot. So that's really easy to implement the prehab in that aspect. But then it was, okay, how can I help put everybody else in it that maybe isn't post-surgical but um needs a little bit more work, or needs a like more help with their dynamic warm up before practice or before a match. And that's where it was really seamless, because I was just able to, hey, throw it on. Like, I'm not doing anything extra with you. We're still doing our normal dynamic warm up, but throw the shirt on, throw the shorts on. And then the next layer even to that was throughout season. Yeah, we would throw them in cold tubs or have them contrast, and they'd wear the shorts for it. They'd wear the shirt for it depending upon, kind of where the aches, pains, ailments, like where they felt like they needed to feel a little bit more fresh. But then we also got to the point where traveling, being in film, give them the shirt, give them the shorts, do your 5 minutes on, couple minutes off, 3 rounds while you guys are in film. You're already in film for 40 minutes. I'm not asking you to come in and do an additional 20-minute recovery session. Let's just double dose it. So I think that was probably one of the greatest pieces to all of this, was I didn't have to reinvent the wheel and schedule them for more moments to get better. It was something that was just able to be added into the structure that's already in place.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously where we start to see consistency and compliancy start to stack up, and then athletes start to learn just based off of, wow, when I do it in this segment, I feel really good. So maybe it works for me to do it in post game, or like you said, in meetings
Mhm.
and so on. Um, Talk to me about some of the challenges initially. Because obviously, as much as we would love to say, okay, I flipped the light switch and everything turned on and this was perfect, but I imagine that there's some challenges that go along the way with integrating something like this and something new in general.
So it is kind of tough because I think I had more worries about potential challenges than actually came to fruition.
Mm,
Right? You put on BFR, whether it's, you know, your standard cuff or it's apparel like Hytro, and you get a pump and you start looking all vascular and you kind of have some of that like physical visible thing going on, and me just having the thought process, mindset, false notion that women are not going to like that feeling or like that look,
uh-huh.
and um, how do I sell them on it's okay that every vein in your arm is showing right now? Um, and again, that was a worry that I had that I don't know why I worried about it. I do like to think I've done a decent job at establishing a good culture within the teams and athletes that I work with. And I don't even know who started at this point, so credit to them, but like the beautiful or the strong is beautiful.
Mm.
Um, and that kind of comes up when they get this little pump, when they get this feeling using the BFR specifically in the upper body. And I was just like, I don't even need to have this whole speech or have this whole convincing moment that like it's good for you, because they embraced it as a strong is beautiful. Like this is helping me. So it's kind of cool to see that now when I sit there and I've had conversation with you, Chase, Raj about it. With that, they do hate to love it and love to hate it. Because there were moments that, all right, hey, everyone's got mandatory recovery today after practice. Like maybe we're not lifting, but we're doing mandatory recovery today. And they would walk into the training room knowing they're probably going to cold tub or contrast. And when they saw me, they knew I was putting them in the shorts, and while they're getting there, like, strapping in the shorts, they're telling me that they don't really appreciate me at that moment, but they were doing it, and so they're saying, like, "No, I hate these shorts," while they're putting them on, while they're getting into the tub, and so there was a little bit of, like, pushback and fight, but again, there was enough success of how good they felt that it was a little roses and butterflies, honestly.
Mhm.
um So the feeling stinks. The vascularity in the upper body is sometimes, you know, a little asterisk to the whole situation, to the whole procedure, but it's truly gone off without a hitch.
I just wanted to ask, you've spoken about the sort of acute responses and successes, but now that you've had it embedded for a slightly longer period of time now, have you sort of seen those compounding effects throughout the season or throughout the period you've been using the product?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of become that like multiplier to availability, where we're not going and doing all of this extra, but we're, like I already said, implementing it into our routine, finding ways to compound qualities we're chasing, finding ways to compound and create more habits or better habits with recovery. And I think, like I said at the very beginning, it's not always the best team at the end that wins, it's the most available. If we can have everybody's still within their threshold of athleticism that it's going to take to beat the opponent that we're lined up against, and we're able to multiply that availability because they just flat out feel better. I'd say that that's what I'm seeing right now as the biggest piece.
Yeah, I think there's real value there. And I think psychologically for the athletes, I imagine they think, well, at least we're not being asked to do anything extra. Oh, it might make it feel a little bit worse, but like I'm kind of doing it anyway and I'm getting the benefit. So yeah, I think we hear that quite a lot, don't we, Chase?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we overcome those initial skepticisms with time, and when the athletes have enough exposure to start to actually feel a difference. And even as Kelly, you and I were talking about it, like using BFR in a warm up is like, wait, what? Like I haven't
Mhm.
thought about that before. But when we think about the synergy between what we're trying to accomplish with a warm up and what BFR does, it just makes too much sense. And then whenever I have coaches who are new to it or athletes, I always nudge them in that direction because I know they're going to have a visceral response, and then they're going to follow that with activity. And then they start to make that link, and it's like, okay, wow, there's definitely something here. And then
Mhm.
that just helps overcome some of those initial challenges or skepticisms of using it. Um, Kelly, my next question, because you mentioned quite a bit early on about the demands of the sport, especially in season, and the level of focus on recovery. Can you
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about where Hytro shows up for you the most from a recovery standpoint throughout maybe throughout like a whether it be a daily or kind of weekly cycle for the athletes in season?
Yeah, I would think, it probably shows up most for us, in season and typically after the longer travel bouts that we have, like if we're coming back from the West Coast, or maybe we weren't on the West Coast, but we, bopped around on the East Coast back and forth multiple times. And a lot like it wasn't to the West Coast, but we went Michigan State in a weekend. I think we were gone 4 days, and I believe, if my memory is not failing me, I believe both of those matches went 5 sets, or they at least more than 3. And so just knowing, like, in that moment, like, whether we anticipated them going 5 sets or not, they did. We were on the road for 4 days. Big Ten schedule with volleyball is dictated heavily by TV. So then we turn around after that and, probably either have a game shortly thereafter within a couple days, or we know we have a little bit longer, but that's a game where we're like, that one's probably going to be a 5 setter, or maybe it's not 5 sets, but like it's going to take a lot out of us. It's going to be a physical game. We're gonna have to be playing at a maximal effort to be able to win this one. And so those were the moments where it was like, okay, either we're dropping lift, which again, me as a strength coach, like I sometimes hate that. That like that's the solution I think of. But again, with BFR, there's still so many positive things that I will get if I drop a lift and I throw them in the BFR. So it's not like, oh, I'm just dropping lift and making you foam roll for 20 minutes. I'm putting you in BFR, I'm revascularizing the muscle, or reperfusing the muscle. I'm able to give them or provide them with an opportunity to better recover on a quick turnaround or long travel, and not always have to take the hit that, all right, we're not lifting today.
So would you say it shows up in like that session specifically? Would that be
Mhm.
something that you're working through just some like movement flows, adding BFR to? Are you going to do some training? Like it may be one of those sessions that you're like, okay, mechanical load is just out the door today, but we're going
Mhm.
to loading with BFR, or is it really more specific kind of recovery based?
So kind of again, I like my buckets. So I kind of bucketed across the board of we have means to be able to manage or monitor load within practices and match. So we have that technology, and I'm pretty in tune with what we're looking at on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes it'll be, hey, you're just coming in and I need you to tub or contrast. Sometimes it's you pick, sometimes our athletic trainer would pick, sometimes it would be a combination of the two. But all right, that you're doing this, you're going through that protocol. We got the timer set in the weight room. Strap in at this point, unstrap at this point, and go through your thing. There would be others that it was okay, maybe not as high of a load, maybe don't need to just prioritize recovery. So let's take you through some of your prehab movements. If you're someone that's dealing with a lot of patellar tendon pain, we did have a little bit higher of a load. Your knees are kind of bugging you. Awesome. Let's knock out some of those prehab, and then let's tub you, and then let's throw you on the bike. Um, and then I'd say kind of the last one that was really helpful on the road for us was just throwing them in the hotel pool and doing a pool recovery in the shirt or the shorts or both. And Again, getting a big bang for our buck. They travel with foam rollers, but to be able to unweight them, but still give them the adaptations from the BFR and the recovery component, that was probably then that last bucket of we're not just tubbing, we're not just biking or doing prehab. We also kind of have that pool recovery session in it as well.
Yeah, I think Kelly, and I want to kind of shift just a little bit because
Mhm.
you talked about using it in preparation, like warm-ups, etc. Um, and the reason I think it's a good segue is I think what tends to get missed is the fact that when you're using BFR in a warm-up, it's kind of a sneaky way to dose some recovery
Mhm.
and or neuromuscular function. And how often would you have the athletes go through Hytro as a part of their warm up? Was this mostly pre-match or pre-practice? When did that show up the most from like a warm up or preparatory piece?
On the warm up and preparatory side, it was every day. The only asterisk I'll put to that is we did those that would warm up for practice in the shorts, would not warm up in the shorts for a match. Um, just because it's a little bit odd of a look. We're on TV, there's broadcasters, there's, a couple thousand fans in the building. And it was a conversation that I had with the athletes. I said, "You are more than welcome to."
Mhm.
But I do also recognize that, the straps are in a little bit of an uncomfortable place. Like, it's up to you. And so there's a couple of them that, if they didn't feel as great or whatever, they'd throw the shorts on actually in the training room before we would come out for our dynamic warm up and they would still do it. But the shirts were super seamless for the athletes that would warm up, match, and practice in that because they would just throw it on under the warm up top. And honestly, nobody ever really even knew it was taking place because then when they go back to change out of their warm up top and in their jersey, they'd come running out and toss me their shirt and I'd go put them away and get them washed, but it was an everyday thing. Except, we still gotta find a solution to make that neck hole a little bit bigger because there were a couple times where it was gonna mess up their hair.
Mm.
So there were a couple games where we dropped the shirt for a few of them because when they took it off, it was gonna mess up their beautiful hair. It's real
We
world
wouldn't want
problems,
that.
I'm
We
telling
we
you.
wouldn't want that. Yeah, we wouldn't
No.
want that. You mentioned towards the beginning about what was really important for volleyball players, and we spoke a lot about explosiveness. And are you using BFR currently to aid with sort of fast twitch activation or yeah, recruitment or muscle fiber growth or anything specific there in your use of BFR currently?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that I've thrown in. On kind of the prehab side, one of our volleyball coaches sat there and told me that I need to get someone's arm swing faster. And I was like, all right, well, I'm always up for a challenge. And again, I clearly am an advocate for Hytro. I enjoy it. I've had great success with it. But Chase and I have also then sat there and had some of those conversations on the education and where are different protocols that with normal BFR cuffs typically aren't conducive to implement BFR. And so I have started playing with a couple different methods of someone comes in and does some prehab and now we're finishing that last little grouping of exercises with a little bit of med ball work and doing something a little bit more explosive still at that lighter load, but doing something that would probably err more on that side of fast twitch. And we'll see how that goes. I've already caught some comments from the coaches that they're pleased with what they're seeing. Um, but yeah, we're seeing what we can pull out of it from a fast twitch standpoint right now.
Always good to keep the coaches happy, hey?
Yeah.
And when we've spoken a lot about sort of time and load and fatigue, they're all sort of competing together. In your mind, if you had to pick sort of where BFR solves a problem most effectively, what would it be? Or is it a wonderful cocktail of all of those things?
Can you give me my options again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so sort of thinking about time constraints, load management, fatigue.
So Yeah, I'm utilizing BFR in every way possible. I think that's just, simply put, the best piece of the versatility that Hytro provides from BFR. If I can implement it on all areas, I will. There hasn't been an area that I've implemented it where the athletes come back and say they genuinely hated it. They might have hated the way it felt while they were doing it, but they loved the after effect. So I'm gonna go at it on all fronts.
Great answer. We like that. Okay, Chase, before we wrap things up, do you have any other BFR questions for Kelly specifically? I feel like we've
The
covered a
the
lot of
only
ground.
Yeah, I think the only one that I have a question on is you've got a full year under your belt using this. You've
Mhm.
got, I'm sure, far more comfortable. What is potentially next, or what are you excited about potentially exploring with this, and maybe a gap that this can potentially help fill?
I think that biggest piece is that fast twitch muscle, um, end of things. Just knowing there's there's always that room for improvement, but also when you start talking about recruitment of type 2 muscle fibers, like, you start talking about genetic potential and where that stops and where that starts, and, um, even though we always talk about maximizing genetic potential in this profession, like, okay, but who's actually having the answer of where it starts and where it stops for a student athlete? And so I think it's one of those things where, um, I have now been here through 3 seasons. I've used it in the last season. I'm about to have 4 outstanding seniors, and or at least I should say 4 outstanding seniors that I have had all 4 years they've been here. And so, right, you have that linear progress, and sometimes it bops up and down, but you have where they started and where they've come, and seeing, are we able to get that, like, 0.5% better, that 1% better that, if we didn't have this modality, it may not come to fruition. Granted, I like to say I'm always gonna try to find a way and try to problem solve and troubleshoot and do all of those things, but I'm probably most excited to see what we're able to pull out from the fast twitch muscle fiber standpoint.
Yeah, I'll be excited to kind of walk the journey a little bit with you, or at least hear how
Yeah.
things. Um, I think just kind of like topping us off here just a little bit. From your perspective, Kelly, what do you think it really means for a volleyball athlete to be built to outperform?
I think being able to have that sustainability throughout the season and that repeatability where, I said it at the beginning of our conversation today, is they're a top 10, top 15 program year in and year out. And so they already have that athleticism. There's an outstanding coaching staff that's working on that skill development. So where can I keep them available? And then where can I just push the needle a little bit more, to be able to sustain that athleticism through the grueling season that is collegiate volleyball.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kelly. That was really, really interesting. As I say, it's always fascinating to be able to peek behind the curtain on a sport that I know almost nothing about. And I imagine a lot of people listening, maybe they don't know it as well as their main sport. So thanks. It was really fascinating and obviously really exciting to hear about the successes that you're having with Hytro as well. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kelly, this has been just an outstanding episode. Love to be able to just, you're such a brilliant coach, and I've gotten to learn a lot from you over the years. So I'd love to be able to really dive in and learn not just about how you're using, Hytro and BFR within your day to day. I think it's going to help a lot of coaches that are starting to explore, how do I actually embed this into my existing process? What outcomes can I anticipate? So I think this was really helpful for a lot of people. So just want to say thank you for all the time, and look forward to seeing you next week out in Fort Worth.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys having me.
Thanks, Kelly.